Yes, I know the title of this video is stupid. I was rereading Emerson Baker's excellent book A Storm of Witchcraft recently, and was struck by a brief mention that during the Salem witch trials, some accused people confessed that Satan had tempted them by offering them consumer goods, namely, quote, fine things and fine goods. One adolescent boy even claimed he had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for a pair of French fall shoes. So why is the devil hawking Nikes? What the heck is going on here? Well, the pursuit of specialty goods had always fueled colonialism, going all the way back to Columbus. But in the late 17th century, European kingdoms really began to settle into their roles as planet-spanning imperial powers at the helm of massive industrial operations, connected by a hugely complex mycelial network of transoceanic trade. Under feudalism, wealth had been measured by the ownership of land. Now, with global commerce, wealth was portable, and thanks to industrial manufacturing, it was regenerative, perpetually regenerative as far as European merchants were concerned. Columbus had sought to bring wealth to Spain so it could afford to field armies that would destroy the enemies of Christendom. He had big ideas about the Spanish monarchs retaking the Holy Land and ushering in the second coming of Christ. Distinctly medieval concerns. But as the early modern era unfolded, supply and demand incentivized a system of profit for profit's sake, independent of feudal power structures. Globalization had naturally necessitated the creation of a new economic order, with far more power and influence than any monarch could ever hope to achieve individually. And capitalism, as we know it today, was gradually and laboriously born. Every corner of the colonized world was affected by the demands of this new system, and New England was no exception. The first large-scale industry to make its mark on the region was the fur trade, which permanently entangled indigenous nations in the global economy. The fishing and whaling industries emerged off the Massachusetts and Maine coasts, beginning the New England maritime tradition. Inland, lumberjacks cleared forests in order to build those fishing ships and to satisfy a demand for wood among the plantation owners of the West Indies. And as soon as those old-growth forests had been cut down and carted away, the farmers swooped in, enclosing the newly cleared land to grow corn or raise cows and pigs, to feed the growing population of colonists settling deeper and deeper into the interior of the continent. I think it's fair to say that these industries were proto-capitalist, if not outright capitalist, especially the maritime trades concentrated on the coast in port towns like Salem. They were helmed by a coastal urban bourgeoisie who also took self-appointed roles in the colony's leading religious, political, and military offices, serving their own interests rather than those of England. There was a brief return to a more mercantilist economy when the Crown made a heavy-handed move to control Massachusetts' affairs with the establishment of the Dominion of New England in 1686, but when the Dominion was overthrown 3 years later, the merchant class simply reassumed control. Early capitalism was extremely successful in enriching late 17th century Massachusetts, despite serious setbacks. The devastation of King Philip's War in the mid-1670s had shattered the economy and bankrupted the colonial treasury. But in a relatively short period of time, a little over 10 years, many industries had bounced back, equaling or even surpassing their pre-war prosperity. Before 1660, during the heyday of the egalitarian Puritan idealism of the first generation of New England colonists, the mean value of the estates of Salem town residents had been lower than average compared to surrounding towns. But the following 20 years saw an explosion of commerce, which made Salem townsmen an average of 1/3 wealthier than people from the rest of Essex County. But the new mode of production also exacerbated income inequality. Evidence from probated wills reveals that the richest 10% of Salem residents during this same period controlled 62% of its wealth. Massachusetts was getting richer, but not everyone was sharing the bounty. In fact, the rise of Salem as an international center for capitalist commerce left one group of local people in particular feeling a serious socioeconomic squeeze: farmers living on the outskirts of town. In their landmark study of the causes of the Salem witch trials back in the early 70s, historians Paul Boyer and Stephen Nissenbaum famously laid out in excruciating detail how social, cultural, religious, and economic factors widened the divide between Salem town, the capitalist urban core of the community by the seaport, and Salem village, the smattering of pre-capitalist rural farmsteads on its outskirts and in its orbit. Today, the location of fucking Danvers! As Salem town grew richer, Salem village grew poorer. Across Essex County, wealth in agricultural assets and equipment plummeted in the decades preceding the trials. In the 1650s, farm wealth had represented 50% of the county's total. In the 1680s, it had gone down to 9%. Climatological factors contributed to the disparity. The latter half of the 17th century was a particularly cold period of the Little Ice Age. Unusually dry summers led to widespread crop failures. Massachusetts, once a major exporter of farmed food, was actually importing cereal grains by the 1690s. Emerson Baker points out that Europe in earlier centuries had seen a high correlation between extreme weather and outbreaks of witchcraft. Salem continues this pattern. Farmers across Massachusetts were struggling to produce a surplus. Salem Village saw a significant drop in population during this period. This also strikes me as a characteristically capitalist phenomenon, which would become endemic in the industrial and post-industrial world. Rural flight, something we're experiencing today here in the Gulf Coast states, what we also refer to as our brain drain. There's just not much opportunity here, so educated people with the means to do so usually leave. When wealth concentrates in cities, rural people tend to follow the money. Many Salem Village residents attempted to diversify their income by starting businesses along the Ipswich Road, a major thoroughfare which ran by Salem, connecting Boston to the North Shore, leading, as the name would imply, up to Ipswich, another wealthy seaport. The Ipswich Road corresponds pretty closely to modern Route 128, which today serves the exact same function. And much like an interstate going through a struggling rural area today, local businesses crowded around the road, trying to pick up some of the crumbs of the wealth which traveled along it to and from the more prosperous capitalist commercial centers. As so often happens, economic change was followed by cultural change. Salem town was becoming more cosmopolitan, more diverse, and more materialistic than their more traditionally Puritan rural neighbors in the village. Boyer and Nissenbaum caution us, however, from viewing this as a simple binary between capitalists and Puritans. Puritanism's relationship with emergent capitalism was highly complex, a very on-again, off-again type of relationship. And Salem villagers were ambivalent about the prosperity of Salem town. Some found the commercial developments there exciting, others resented and feared the changes they brought. But while feelings were mixed, they always seemed to be quite strong. Then, as now, traditional rural people have complex and often contradictory feelings about wealthier and more cultured urbanites. In their minds, cities are both disgusting and alluring. City folks are paradoxically both pathetically incompetent, like they don't know what it's like to plow a field or whatever, and also insurmountably powerful, conceived of on one hand as glamorous tastemakers, aspirational movie star figures, and on the other as sinister elites setting prescriptive cultural agendas which undermine the social cohesion of the rural community, an anxiety reinforced every time a young person in a small town pulls up stakes and tries to make it in the big city. Rural attitudes towards cities often manifest as a superiority complex and an inferiority complex all rolled into one. Ambivalence this polaric can be extremely uncomfortable psychologically and lead to strong cognitive dissonance. And when people feel cognitive dissonance on a collective cultural level, especially during scary times when money is tight, they tend to lash out. Salem Village in 1692 was a community in profound flux. Emergent capitalism was causing an enormous amount of anxiety in the community, and that anxiety was going unaddressed. The village had its own meeting house, ministered by Samuel Parris, who of course is a central figure in the history of the trials, and it had some of its own municipal institutions, but it wasn't its own independent town. Politically, it was a part of, and in all practical terms, subservient to, Salem town. The village had no clear legislative or legal recourse available to them to try to relieve their many frustrations. When the witchcraft accusations started flying in February 1692, it initially seemed no different from the other periodic outbreaks of devilry New England had faced before. The first 3 women accused were societal undesirables: an enslaved woman of color, a widely despised beggar, and an elderly shut-in who never went to meeting. This fit with previous trends in the history of European witch trials, that of witchcraft as an unconscious pretext to purge communities of culturally nonconforming individuals. But as the accusations exponentially increased and reached unprecedented proportions, a new pattern emerged. Accusations spread out from Salem Village itself to strike at Salem town and the surrounding communities, and generally, the accusations punched up the social ladder. In March, they accused 2 church members. In April, they accused the wealthiest ship owner in Salem. By May, warrants had been issued for 2 Salem town selectmen. That summer, some of the wealthiest and most respected people in Massachusetts had either been accused or formally charged. with witchcraft. Faced with sweeping, unstoppable economic change, Salem villagers took their power back by lashing out at those they felt were most responsible for that change, in the gravest way their spiritual worldview allowed, by literally demonizing them as servants of Satan. And what did Satan offer in exchange for a witch's soul? Material wealth comes up again and again in confessions. Fine goods, fine clothes, fine things, 25% off with the coupon code CUMROCK. So did capitalism cause the Salem witch trials? Well, it didn't not cause it. But as with most historical events, the Salem outbreak was caused by varied and multifaceted factors. Economic uncertainty interplayed with religious anxiety, social discord, political skullduggery, wartime trauma, and even interpersonal squabbles, all informing and intersecting with each other, all building to a horrific eruption of panic and violence. That said, it's important to emphasize that times of material uncertainty is when knives are always most likely to come out. By understanding how massive global economic forces can exert a tangible effect on us psychologically as individuals, maybe we can face hard times with a cooler head and avoid the tragedy of yet another Salem witch trial.
Cut it to the bone.